Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster recovery, business continuity, service management, COVID, well-being, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If there's a topic you'd like us to talk about on the show, please feel free, reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Alex Fullick. I am the only one there, so I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. I am speaking later this year at three conferences, October 4th to 6th at Continuity Insights in Minneapolis. November 3rd to 4th, I will be part of the BCI World Virtual Conference. And December 1st to 2nd, I will be in Toronto, which is just down the road for me, at the Continuity and Resilience Today conference. Today, we're going to be talking with a returning guest. He is the author of ITIL4, The New Frontier. It just came out, and he's actually been on the show before. If you go to the Voice America site for the show, his last episode was October 29th, 2020, and we talked about business continuity planning, the art of remaining continuous. And today, I'd like to welcome back to the show the author of ITIL4, Jeffrey Tefertiller. Jeffrey, welcome back.
Thank you, Alex. That is much ado to live up to. So hopefully I can fill those shoes.
Oh, I'm sure you can. First of all, congratulations on the new book.
Thank you. That's only number 6 for me. I'm still way behind you, and so
that's all.
But it's one of those that I think we have a similar passion, that we have these thoughts, and how do we be able to put them down, organize them, and be of value to other people as they're trying to figure out their journey. And just because we dwell on it more, we try to put it down and organize it in a way that maybe offers value to people.
Yeah, we want to make it easier for other people who come after us or trying to figure something out. Here's my experiences. Here's my thoughts. Here, hopefully this can be of help to you. Plus, It's really good because we do our own research as well. So we're also teaching ourselves.
Oh, I learn a lot. And, most people would say, how come ITIL and business continuity, how come you do both? And so to me, they're very similar in that service management just worries about defining services, especially what IT needs to deliver to the business customers. And business continuity and DR is like, how do we keep those going in the time of an event? And so to me, they're the same thought process, even though to many other people, they're a one-off or two-off thought process.
Well, let's jump into that, because you mentioned service management, business continuity, ITDRP. What is ITIL?
So to me, ITIL means different than maybe others. But let's start with a history lesson, if I may. So way back in the 80s, United Kingdom, Great Britain government agency called CCTA started this because they were unhappy with the services they were being delivered. They're like, how can we do this in a standardized way? And it became part of their GC, let me see if I can say this right, Office for Government Commerce, OGC. And so they started, the Great Britain government started putting out this better practice. And in fact, in the very early 2000s, Microsoft used it as part of their framework that they were working on. And so ITIL had version 2 and then version 3, and now we're on just version 4. But it's a way of looking at what IT delivers to their consumers in a business point of view. And so I have this weird view, and I think it's right, but it's just weird to many, where, and you see it in the business continuity world as well, is the technology that was traditionally IT is now become spread across the enterprise. A bank isn't just a bank, it's a technology company. The same with the hospital. So when you think of business continuity, there's a lot of technology throughout a bank to keep continuous, or DR to recover. And so ITIL is a way of looking at that from a strategic point of view. So you'll see like SLAs, Okay, what are our service levels that we need to deliver? You may see it as what changes, how do we, do things in a methodical way so we don't put new code and take things down. It's
Oh,
just
no,
a
no,
way
that never, ever happens.
it happens everywhere. And no, it's people don't realize how bad the situation is. And
Mhm.
ITIL is just a way in service management or broader, because there are other service management frameworks like COBIT and others that try ISO that try to do similar. But it's just a way of looking at the IT services from a business perspective. And that was the big thing that ITIL v3 did, was it spun from an IT centric view to okay, we're delivering services for someone. Now we have to figure out, how do we deliver the best services, the right services, things of that nature. We were talking about BIAs off air, and traditionally the business impact analysis was, all right, what are your core business processes, right?
Mhm.
And the funny part, you and I joked in the past, is it's hard to get people to agree with those. And so you think about like how in an IT versus a centric view versus a business centric view, there's even less alignment because they see the world differently. And for a myriad of reasons, maybe the IT people say, well, we've invested a lot of resources in X. And the business person says, well, we don't care about X anymore. We care about Y. And so, there's this disconnect. And so ITIL looks to try to bridge that gap and say, how do we do things better? How do we improve? How do we have the right governance? How do we do things better?
I remember when ITIL started, and ITIL now, correct me if I'm wrong, is actually a word now. It's not an acronym, but I believe it used to stand for Information Technology Infrastructure Library.
Yes, that's because the previous, the original and V2 were IT centric, and so it was, we care about our infrastructure. We cared about the incidents and changes and to the infrastructure. And so when V3 came out in 2008, it flipped everything on its head, because they brought in concepts like business relationship management and demand management, which is all, what does the business need from us? What do we need to deliver, whether it's services or quality of services? But it broaches the thought of, we need to align our resources, people, technology, process, with what the business needs. Because I've used this scenario before, but can you imagine opening up a retail service business, whether it's a hair salon or a shoe store or whatever, and you didn't even care what your customers wanted? You're a hair salon, and you say, we're only doing X kind of hair, but it has no like alignment to what the customers want at the price the customers want. And so that's what we in IT have done for a long time. And we need to start spinning that view and say, let's take a customer centric view and deliver what they need, and then work backwards.
So you mentioned version 1, the original, and version 2 were IT centric. 3 introduced the business perspective. So what has 4 introduced? What has it done?
Much is still the same. So there's 3 things that are unique. The ITIL authors chose to make what were traditionally called processes practices. And you think of like a legal practice or a medical practice where there's a sense of excellence, like how do we do things well? And so you think incident management, major incidents, security, things of those natures that were processes. Now there's like, how do we do things well? Some people would say it's semantics. I won't argue with you, but that's their thought. The second is the push towards adopting agile, lean, DevOps, all those frameworks. So you'll see things in ITIL4 like start where you are, iterate from there, things of that nature that you'll see that smell a lot like agile and DevOps. You're like, I think that smells like agile and DevOps. And then the last thing is, they, instead of having like the service life cycle, which was traditionally ITIL, where you would have service strategy, design, transition, operations, and then continual service improvement, it's more of a service value chain. And even if you think of value mapping, which we do in business continuity as well, it's instead of let's say you have something down, and instead of bringing it back and say, we got to go all the way through design, all the way through transition, and now back to operate, it has more of that DevOps feel in the value mapping, where we go, okay, what's the happiest path, the shortest path to us getting this result, trying to minimize as much bureaucracy. There's still plenty of bureaucracy, and most organizations struggle with that bureaucracy versus governance pendulum, or, I think of it like a teeter-totter out in the kids' playground. We have to have that balance of, we have to have governance without bureaucracy. And even in the business continuity world, I mean, I'm sure there's enough arrows being shot in that direction as well. And it's like, how do we provide that level of governance that, if I have this basic belief, and I put this in that book, is if we want to go fast, there has to be governance. You think of airplanes, those parts are scrutinized, even those nuts and the bolts. And when I'm flying, I want them scrutinized. You think of aeronautics or anything that goes fast, there's high governance. And so if we're talking about in ITIL4, we have to go fast, there has to be governance to keep the train on the tracks while it's going really fast, so it doesn't fly off one direction or the other.
So why did 3 change it? Because you said it was, it introduces business perspectives. I know it was successful because I knew a lot of places that were adopting quite a bit of version 3. So what caused the change to a version 4? Why did we have to change what was apparently working?
I think you have 2 reasons. And one of them is the need to adapt these other frameworks. And this is another personal view, is that with the strong move towards outsourcing since 2008, you have to think how many large companies have at least one external partner, maybe dozen. And, we deal with that in the business continuity as well, as that makes it pretty complex. But if you're using an external partners in mass, you are pushing your service management down into an operations mode, and you're using Agile and some of the other methods for your delivery. That's what's happened in a lot of organizations. So you'll see a lot of Scrum, a lot of Agile, a lot of DevOps, a lot of product teams throughout an organization. But then they've subbed out or contracted out their operations. And these organizations were like, now, when it was our internal people, we're not, we didn't care about SLAs. But now that we're paying someone, we're going to hold their feet to the fire. We're going to make sure we get every ounce of our money out of it. And so part of that is to incorporate Agile, and a part of it is knowing that there's this shift towards this outsourcing, that we have to understand that at ITIL and service management might become more, even though I don't want it to be, more operational, more tactical, and less strategic. So then it would be brought down in an organization and need to be able to incorporate with Agile, need to be able to incorporate with these other frameworks.
But how would you go about doing that? If you've got an external, because your partner, whoever they are, is going to have their own frameworks for doing things. And even if you're outsourcing your operations, your different components, they could be operating on something completely different. So how do you reconcile the two to get what you need?
Usually that's baked into the contracts. But what will happen in organizations is they'll have their own software development. They'll have their own product teams that are all internal. And so they'll use specific external partners just for that. And then, so that'll be an Agile methodology with product teams and such. But when it goes to going live, that's where it'll kick over to the service management side. And so there has to be this handoff, which is very tricky, between either 2 external partners or one internal to an external, because then you get into things which was in traditionally the service design package, which is how do we want to transition it? How do we want to operate it? How do we want to measure it? And even I would go back and say, we need to say, how do we secure it? How do we keep it remaining continuous? Before it goes live, we have to have those mechanisms say, how do we remain continuous? But now you're talking 2 different entities. And to your point, it is tricky because they don't always agree, right? Because what I have found as I've aged is that everybody does what they're incentivized to do. And so you are incentivizing different groups differently. So the product teams are like, how quickly can we get it in, right? And the operations team are like, how do we have the highest amount of uptime? Sometimes those are in conflict.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times those are in conflict. And so that's where it really, in the book, I go into detail how a lot of times you need the subject matter expertise. And I would say the same about business continuity, whether internal or an external partner, to help guide you through at least getting this set up and on the right track, or you're going to have issues. And this is one of those ways, is you'll have issues because you're going to turn something over to someone and it may be junk because they're saying, I'm taking an iterative approach, and we'll slowly work out the bugs, where the team doing the operations getting yelled at because stuff is down and they didn't sign off on this. And so there's this work in progress. But getting back to like the bigger question is, there's also some things, and I think we'll talk about in the service value chain, that talk about how do we obtain our goods and services, or how do we obtain what we need to create these products and services. And so it's an outright admittal that some of our inputs are going to be outsourced. Like we can't outsource the setting up the servers for a development work. We can't outsource certain pieces of it that contribute to the bigger whole of products or services we're delivering.
And when you talked about the risk there with the one group wanting speed, another one wanting quality, and making sure it works properly, I couldn't help but think, my goodness, that's like project management 101.
Exactly.
You can either have it fast or you can have it good, and if the two aren't in alignment, then your cost is going to get impacted, right? Or something else will be impacted.
Exactly, especially because they're incentivized differently. They're not incentivized at the same rate, and so if we all do what we're incentivized to do, then you have to take that at face value and say, okay, this, to put stuff in fast is incentivized one thing, but we have to make sure there's coordination on the back end and they sign off on the testing to make sure it goes live.
Yeah.
For example.
Yeah, stakeholder management, making sure that there's good communications throughout the whole thing. Everyone understands expectations, and then to your point, signing off that yes, this is exactly what we all agreed to.
Exactly, but I would even say some of those stakeholders are your business continuity, your security, some of your other groups so everybody thinks wrongly of business continuity being reactive, but it's so much easier to have it as new functionality comes on and have it addressed at the front end. And I think our security peers would say the same, is how do we address that in a proactive way where we know what's there and can deal with it as such.
Yeah, I agree with you. And on that note, we've come to the end of our first segment. We are talking with Jeffrey Tefertiller today, the author of ITIL4, The New Frontier. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Today we are talking about ITIL4, The New Frontier, with author and expert Jeffrey Tefertiller. Jeffrey, in the first segment, you talked about the service value system, which is something new to ITIL version 4. Can you explain that for us, what it's all about?
I will try to as easily as possible. So if you think of it as a happy path between what you're getting, that request from your customer, think of any service that you walk up to the counter and that you give them your order. Between that and the delivery, the service value system works in between. So let's talk about it. So there's demands. And so demands and opportunities are two words you'll see in ITIL4. Demand means we know what this request is. We've had them before, and they're usually in the self-service portal. An opportunity will be something that is a request for new functionality that you haven't seen before or you don't see regularly enough. So the service value system will look at that demand, and it'll say, okay, how do we process this? The next stage is an engage, which is engage with the person that put the order in, see, what flavor of ice cream they want, so to speak. Because historically, IT said, Mr. or Mrs. Business Person, here it is in blue. And the business person would say, I want it in green. IT would say, I understand, here it is in blue, And so this is at the front, this engage with the business person is saying, okay, let's understand requirements. Let's understand what we need to do. And then you'll talk about obtain and build. When I talked about that a minute ago, that obtain could be from an external source, right? We may layer on service providers through here, like you see with SaaS environments, that's really cropping up where you'll have one SaaS vendor, and then there'll be another one that has a specialty for like the metrics of that one tool, and you'll see them layered. But so that's incorporated as obtain and build. And then you'll see design and transition, mean, okay, we built it, now we how do we transition to live, and then deliver and support, which was traditionally service operations. And those create products and services that are supposed to deliver value to the customer. Supposed to, because if you do it right, they're supposed to. And two of the things that are really important on this is there's a plan. If you see the chart, up at the top is plan, and at the bottom is improve. And so the plan is, think of overall strategy, improve is like continual improvement. And two aspects you'll see throughout the ITIL4 update is improvement and governance. And what's really interesting to me is I like illustrations. So governance is, let's keep the train on the track, like I talked about earlier, how do we do it fast? And improvement is, how do we propel it forward? And so if we keep it on the track, how do we propel it forward? And so all the service value system is taking that demand, this known request, engage with the business, figure out what we need, where we need it from, design it, transition it into live, operate it, get it to operations, and hopefully it creates value to the consumer.
Now, you also talk about service value chain.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple of different categories under that. What were those all about?
That is a subset of this. And it's basically, think about how we think of value. So this is where it's really interesting from the service lifecycle of ITIL v3. So how value is delivered in an organization. I'm going to pick up an example off the top of my head. Let's say banking. How value is delivered to that customer may be through an update to new services. It may be something else, but it's basically saying, here's the way our customers see value. It's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And they may go across several, what we used to call process, now we call practices. But how do we deliver those in as slim line as possible? That's where the governance and the continual improvement come in, is because if we're going fast, we need to figure out how do we improve our process to go fast, and how do we keep the train on the tracks.
When you say governance, I just thought of this. When you say governance, are you talking audit as well? Because a lot of people tend to, as soon as they hear the word governance, oh my God, audit, right? Comes to mind. But that's not what you're talking about, right?
No, and I frequently put on LinkedIn that governance is not a profane word. Most people have made it one over the years. Like, oh no.
Well, that's why I thought I'd ask the question, because I know so many people do.
And like if you get reassigned to governance, it's like the career killer. That's where good people go in the black hole. But governance is basically, how do we do things that it's that all right, so it could be several different things. One is, think about your recalibration of, are we going the right way? How do we calibrate? I know I'm in the US and we use our own system of measurement versus the rest of the world. But I have this research that is always interesting to me. So if I'm going across the Atlantic Ocean from the East Coast of the US or Canada over to Europe, and I'm off by just 1 degree, for every mile I go, I'll be 2 feet off. So if I go 1,000 miles, I'm going 9,200 feet, which is almost 2 miles off. And so it's a big percentage. And so a lot of that governance is how do we keep going down the path we're supposed to? It may be the part of realigning our resources with what our business needs. It may look a lot different, but it almost always has metrics, because are we going the right way? Are we measuring the right things? And, but it also may be a way to make sure that we are engaging the right stakeholders. It may mean that so let's take CMDB. That's the one everybody has heartburn over. Or do we have too much scope or not enough scope? Do we have the right people involved, or do we need to include these stakeholders? So governance looks different. In business continuity, governance may be version control, but it also may be that recalibration of, are you sure these are the right processes we need to make sure are going well? That we have to be continuous. Right.
The right people with the right roles. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's that recalibration of, somebody's got to do that calibration and recalibration and say, are we doing what we're supposed to? And you're right, with the right people, with the right roles, because you may have a SME that doesn't have the right role, but you really need Joe or Sally in that meeting because they know where all the bodies are buried. There's those people in every organization that know everything about that technology, and you want them in every meeting just because now their roles may not look like the ones you want in that meeting, but they know where everything should be and is.
Yeah, they know the stuff sometimes you wish they didn't.
Exactly.
But when they do bring it forward, you're so glad that they know it, that somebody knows it.
Oh yeah. And so it's just how do we do things well? How do we, and that's why governance is needed at all aspects of this, because if we left it up to the operations teams, they would be incentivized to do whatever they could to keep everything operational. But that may not be best for the business customers. But you left it up to the people, the dev teams, theirs is, how do we push out this new functionality that's so cool, our business needs it, but we may not be able to support it. And so governance is like, how do we mesh all this together? How do we do it in a way that the stakeholders get what they need? Maybe not what they want all the time, but what do they need? And how do we have that plan? How do we talk in such a way and have a roadmap to get them what they need?
I like the example you just gave about DevOps teams. Sometimes, new functionality, customers want it, blah, blah, they're going to love it. They push it out, it goes out, and customers are just, what the heck is this? I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this. It was just a new toy somebody else had developed and thought it looked cool that everybody else would like. So I've seen the opposite of, where something does get pushed and people are, no thanks.
Exactly. But somebody's got to be the puppeteer, right? Somebody's got to be the one calling the shots, has a big enough picture view, and make sure everything's coordinated.
Yeah. Now we were talking about demands, and I think you mentioned two that caught my attention. There were the existing requests, so kind of like business as usual requests, for lack of a better way of saying it, and new requests that come along. But you said there's 4. So what were the other 2 that we might be missing?
Well, we also have like compliance, right? So we also have those compliance needs where we need the compliance teams involved. We have requirements, especially in regulatory environments. This comes up all the time when I'm doing business continuity stuff, that we're doing things one way and the compliance team says, whoa, we need the involvement here. And so it's still something, let's put it through the first set of definition. It still smells like something we know. And we just have to figure out, how do we apply it to this situation? We also have information demand, which we have common. You call the service desk, or you look in the knowledge base and you say, hey, I want to know X or Y. So you have that one. You also have failure demand, which is break fix, incident management, my stuff's down, this is down, whatever. And then the last one, I think, is the most interesting. It's value. It's, how do we think of value? How do we ask for something that we already know what it is because we know the value it's going to give us? That's the interesting one to me.
If I understand that correctly, how do we ask ourselves, or how do we ask our external partners and clients and customers?
It may look anyway, but see, that could be, let me give you 3 or 4 examples. It could be, I need Microsoft Project to do my job. That's value because it costs the company $100. It saves me 10 hours. There's a value there. It may be, I need this sort of privilege in this system. It may be, we need as an organization to include these types of assets in our self-service portal because we need those because they add value if we see the bigger picture. It's how do we do things that provide that positive ROI? Because the other three are pretty straightforward: information, break fix, compliance. So you think the other three, if that's what those three are, the other is kind of a catch-all, but there's the presumption that it provides a positive ROI, because you're not going to give everybody Visio because not everybody needs Visio, but it's how do we do that in a strategic manner?
Okay. Now let's move on to guiding principles. Does ITIL4 have any guiding principles?
They have 7, and that's the interesting part to me on those 7 is ITIL4, and I'm trying to stay neutral, not like they're mine or anyone else's. ITIL4 would say that those are, you can use them for any transformation. You can use them any strategy. And so we'll roll through those. Focus on value. So we talked a lot about how do we do things like if the service value system, how do we create products and services that the customer thinks of as value? So if we are focusing on the high value items, that's number 1, right? Let's just start prioritizing what's value. The other is start where you are. And in the book, I talk about, from a service management point of view, having an assessment. I would say the same thing from a business continuity. Like if you focus on value, and I call those in the book a GPS moment. You're in there's amusement park or a shopping mall, and they have these big maps with placards, and it has a little star, and it says, you are here. Mm-hmm. That's all we're saying is you need some kind of objective assessment that says you are here. Because a lot of times leaders will either say, all of our stuff stinks, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater, or my stuff's awesome. You can't tell me otherwise. Of course, I have the best people. My stuff's awesome. So it's just an objective, you are here. So that's the first 2. Number 3 is progress iteratively with feedback. There's that agile smelling. So if we know where we are, we progress iteratively with feedback from our stakeholders that say, yeah, a little to the left, a little to the right. Here's how we need to change. That's the first 3. Number 4 is collaborate and prioritize or promote visibly. Collaborate and promote visibly. So no more silos, no more hidden IT. How do we do things? Building bridges. Because if you remember at the beginning of this, I was talking about how I have this premise that IT and the business technology is all converging. It's all, and we're seeing that in the business continuity world as well, right? There's no 5 years from now, there's not going to be delineation between those two. The next is think and work holistically. So if we make decisions, let's make it for the whole enterprise, not just our little sliver. Number 6 is, this is the one I really like, keep it simple and practical. And so if we think about that, how do we keep things simple and practical because we've all been in those conversations where we've talked to somebody who's very technical in their field. They rattle off all these acronyms that we don't know what they are.
Yeah, Zoom.
And, or they have this impractical thought, and we think, and so if you even think of focus on value and keep it simple and practical, that's a great start. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And the last is optimize and automate. And the interesting thing there is those 2 words are in the right order, because most people would say you need to optimize before you automate. Because why would you automate less than optimize situation? Why would you make it better, faster? Why would you just speed up the outcomes if they're inferior outcomes? Because, automation is just speeding up outcomes. And so we want to make sure they're good outcomes before we automate them.
And on that note, we've come to the end of our second segment. We are talking with Jeffrey Tefertiller today, the author of ITIL4, The New Frontier. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Today we are talking with Jeffrey Tefertiller, author of ITIL4, the new frontier. Jeffrey, let's talk about implementation, because you go into that in your book as well. There's 4 things apparently you talk about that can impact ITIL's implementation.
So let me back up and say, one of the things that makes ITIL4 difficult is the ITIL3 was very prescriptive. It said, if you have an incident, do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. And in our last segment, I said ITIL4 looks at the happy path, which may be different than that. It's not prescriptive. And so these organizations are struggling with, okay, how do I put this into practice? How do I understand these guiding principles. I understand what an incident management practice is, but what do I do with it? And so I talk about 4 things that impact, and I'll save the big one for last. So your in-house expertise. So if you look at these 4 things and you're thinking of how do I put something into practice, even if it's business continuity, I think these all apply. So our in-house expertise, that impacts whether we're able to transition to something new. Because if we don't have the in-house expertise to explain value, to be able to curry some adoption, it's difficult. The second is number of processes that we're trying to now make practices. For business continuity, you think of the business impact analysis, how many of those core processes or whatever we're trying to remain continuous? Because the more you have, the more complex it is. Mm-hmm. And so the same with these processes that are V3, if you have 20 of them, it's different than if you have 4. Just like if you have high-end expertise in-house versus low-end. You can see each one, if you think of it on a scale, there's some weighting that I use in the book. The next is a maturity. Earlier in the last segment, we talked about a GPS moment. You are here. And so that maturity, so let's talk about those. So the number of process. So most organizations, they have change, they have incident, they have request, they may have asset, may have CMDB. How mature are those? That'll determine how quickly I can move, and how good are my people that are trying to help them move. Those 3, if you think of them in a weighted scale, but the one thing that's interesting is the last one is the only one that a leader can control. And that's the speed that they want to implement, the speed they want to transition to the next one. Your in-house expertise, it is what it is. You're not going to change that overnight. You're not going to change it in a year, probably. Same with the number of processes, same with the maturity. You're not going to change that very quickly. But you can, as a leader, adjust the speed, right? If your people aren't good enough for you to go really fast, maybe you just go kind of fast. And so, a leader has that ability to speed things up or slow things down. And so those are the 4 things. So you have your speed, you have your maturity of your ITIL v3 environment, you have your number of processes, and your in-house expertise.
So what are some of the successes? Let's say all that worked out, and I get to use the term that we had in previous segments, happy path. What are some of the obstacles to that happy path success?
Oh, that's
or even if you want to take the happy path out, what are some of the obstacles?
So that's a really good question. And I'll tell you why. Because as I mentioned earlier, when we moved to ITIL v3, all these organizations started outsourcing. And so we have all of our ITSM tools are built on v3. And if people want to check me on it, if you go to change, it's still change management, not change enablement, as ITIL4 calls it. You still have workflows based upon the service lifecycle. So your tools are already set that way. Your metrics are already set up that way. Your processes are already set that way. You also have your organization structure, like we talked about earlier, where you have the application teams and they kick it off to either internal support or external support. And then lastly, the less prescriptive nature that we mentioned just a minute ago. Organizations aren't being told, let me say it this way. We love structure. We love do this, do this, do this. We do. And when there's ambiguity, sometimes it makes us spin our wheels because we just don't know what to do. And so to recount those, you have your ITSM tools that are still based on v3. your processes and your metrics, they will have to be overhauled to make that move to ITIL4, which may not be what some organizations want to do. So it has to be small and incremental. You have your org structure, and it's also less prescriptive.
So what are some of the critical success factors? Now, I don't know, I'm sure you've got a list, but would they be different if you want to go fast, or if you're going slow? Would that list of success factors change if you've got a large organization or a smaller one?
They'd be mostly the same, but let's think about CSFs, critical success factors, in the ITIL terminology, is that these are what we want to accomplish. So our initiative will not be successful unless X. And then we tie all of our KPIs, our key performance indicators, to these CSFs. So we think these are the broad headers that underpin our metrics. So let's just start there. You'll have your in-house knowledge and training. If you don't have people that understand ITIL4, it's probably going to be hard to be successful. Just like, not to be overly obvious there. You also need that assessment in a roadmap of saying that that GPS moment, you are here. Because whether you're a big organization or a small, mature or not, you kind of need to know where you are. And I think, like, if we take that to the business continuity side, that's why those annual, and I would hope that they're more frequent than that, those exercises, those are GPS moments in the business continuity world, right? Those are learning opportunities to say, here's exactly how mature we are. Now we can plot out this roadmap and say, we need to take these steps. It's the same thing. We just need to understand where we are. Also, we need quality people involved. We need to understand the technology that's through the enterprise, because technology is spreading through the enterprise. And back in the old days, us old people would call them IT and OT. Now it's just T, right? It's just technology. Mm-hmm. And so it's the same for business continuity. And we need to show value as we put together these processes and these practices. We need to have that big picture view and show value. We talked earlier about value and the way the customer sees value. And lastly, we need to make sure that and you brought this up earlier, that our external service providers are on board. It would be foolish for us to implement ITIL4 as an organization and have our service providers not be on board, because what we would be measuring isn't what they'd be delivering.
Right. So when it comes to adopting, you make a decision, you want to go down the route of ITIL4, who leads that? Because ITIL still, from its name, people think technology, and we already mentioned that. And you've got your business side. Where does it start? What's the first thing you would do? Yes, you have your assessment meeting, and to use your phrase that's in the book, start where you are, right? But where do you get to that point, and who gets you to that point to organizing and get the right people in the room?
I would say it's much like business continuity, that it needs to go as high as possible in the organization, because those are two topics that are very difficult to be successful when they're bottom-up initiatives. That's just my view. Mm-hmm. And so it's got to be pushed down that we need. And so you think of outcomes. So ITIL4 is basically, when we talked happy path, we talked all those, what outcomes do we need? And so the senior leaders saying, we need these outcomes. And I think that ITIL4 can get us there. So let's get an assessment. Let's then look at it from our business people. Okay, let's prioritize, because it does us no good to put in one practice if that's not, if that's a low priority to our business stakeholders and all the rest of our stakeholders. So let's then, incorporate the feedback and develop a roadmap. And then let's try to put in measures and metrics to measure our progress. And then we also need to think, okay, what kind of process updates do we need? What kind of metrics do we need to measure? And things of those that are more ancillary. But the other piece to it is, most people take their metrics straight out of their ITSM tool. And they do it for the business continuity for some of the tools that have that connection. But if you're trying to measure something that's beyond your tool, it means you may have to have metrics in another place that maybe your ITSM tool is just an input from.
So who, I guess what I'm also getting at is I'm trying to find out who would kind of take over that role to start the ball rolling. The direction I think would come from the senior leadership team, because they're always going to be asking for things that they want to see. How are we doing well in this? How is this occurring, right? And the various metrics that's always going to be there, for till the end of time, I'm sure, and they'll change all the time. But who takes that ball and runs with it? Do they assign someone to, within, director of IT, you're going to run this? That's what I'm kind of wondering, because 1 and 2 was IT, 3 introduced business, and now 4 is going a step further. So I'm wondering, is there somebody that has to be, that can't be defined as business or IT, and has to be someone kind of in the middle that can't be, distinctly one side or the other?
So I would say most companies, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, would start with however their service management organization is set up now. Is it service delivery? Is it a SMO? Is it whatever? But to your point, we had a guest on my podcast that you've been guest on, and you're welcome back whenever you would like, open invitation, who owns the CMDB, but he doesn't report to IT. He reports to an independent group between the two. So his stakeholders are business and IT.
Mhm.
Well, IT's his service provider that he needs stuff from. And so it's a really interesting concept. And he works he's senior director of one of the US's 50 biggest companies. And so I don't want to call it out because I don't want to do that to him without prior acknowledgement. But that we are seeing that movement of what in V3, we had that BRM function, that kind of played referee between IT and the business. But to be able to make it strategic, it's going to take even more than just taking orders and having quarterly meetings. It's going to be, we need that relationship, like how are we going to do well unless we have a relationship? And so I think that's what you're going to see is that next step of some middle ground that's pretty high up, just like risk and governance. If you look at risk and governance in organizations, they are moving up. Corporate risk, corporate governance, they are moving up in the organization because they want that broad appeal. And I would say this will do the same as it becomes enterprise technology, because your assets aren't just IT assets. They may be owned by VP of finance. Okay, now what? Right? Now what? We can't have those same workflows because those ITSM tools historically have only been IT only, because I don't want to unbury too much here, but traditionally those IT orgs did not want their business customers in those tools because they didn't want them to see how the sausage is made, as we say here in the US South, right?
Yeah.
They don't want those business customers. But as things spread out, now there's transparency, which there should be. I'm saying there should be, because the only way we're going to have a relationship is with transparency and trust. And the only way we're going to be able to be aligned is with a good relationship. And that just rolls up further and further up the organization.
And it kind of breaks down, you mentioned it earlier, the silos too. Mm-hmm. It gets rid of that us and them mentality. It's like, no, it's all us, we,
Oh, yeah. We all have to be incentivized. I work on that premise that we all do what we're incentivized to do. We started that when we were kids. Our parents would say, hey, I'll give you a popsicle if you do this chore. And you're like, okay, I want a popsicle. Okay. So you go do it, right? And that's the same thing that happens. And it's all about trying to make sure that everybody's incentivized for the common goal, and that it rolls up to what senior leadership wants it to be.
Well, we've come to the end of the show. Do you have any final thoughts on ITIL4 or service management in general? You did also mention your own podcast, so give it a shout out.
Thank you. It's the Service Management Leadership Podcast. We talk all different topics of service management, business continuity, and asset management. Asset management being like software, hardware stuff. But I just would say that the less prescriptive nature of ITIL4, which is a lot like business continuity in my book, means that you have to have somebody help you, whether it's internal or external, guide you down that path. because it's very difficult to navigate, because the people you're asking to do it internally, they have jobs that they're incentivized to get done. And piling one more thing on Joe or Sally's plate isn't going to get you what you need. You need some kind of expertise.
Right. Well, on that note, we've come to the end of the show. Jeffrey, thanks again for sharing your expertise and time with us. And congratulations on the book. You can get it at Amazon, or you can go to your website too, I believe.
Yep, and mainly at Amazon. I'll let them do the heavy lifting as much as possible.
Yeah, I do too. Well, thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure there'll probably be a third appearance at some point in the future as well.
Thank you, Alex.
And to everybody listening and watching, stay prepared, everybody. After the show, Jeffrey and I had a quick chat, and he's giving you a special offer. Subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, and of course, like the video. And make sure you leave a way of me contacting you, or you can reach me on LinkedIn, and I will send you a free PDF of Jeffrey's new book, ITIL4, The New Frontier, courtesy of Jeffrey Tefertiller. So go ahead and do that. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.